Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. So if you guys have been watching Sean Ryan's show, I'm a huge fan of Sean Ryan. You've probably seen the most recent episode with Elizabeth Phillips. Now, caveat to this, I did not know who Elizabeth was. I didn't know her brother. But for those of you guys that do not know or have maybe watched my show before, or have seen, clips, I grew up in Branson, Missouri. I have been to KANAKUK camps twice in my life, and then I went a third time for a football camp that we did as a team, but that was under the supervision of the team. Twice before this situation with, what's his name? Pete Newman happened. I remember when that happened, it was a huge deal, and the two times that I had gone, I believe were both before 6th grade when this situation had happened. So I got into high school, I believe in 2012, 2011, and this situation happened in 2009, maybe. So a little bit of backstory. Before I get into the backstory, I do want to say that because I think there's going to be some things that I do say in this clip or in this video that can get misconstrued if you don't watch the whole video in context, if you clip it up. But before I get into the backstory and my story and my experience with KANAKUK camps, I just want to say good on Elizabeth for coming out and speaking. And I have zero reason not to believe the things she's saying. Now, at the time of filming this, I've listened to about half of the podcast, so I haven't finished the whole thing, but I'm starting to get the gist. I actually look forward to listening to the entire thing tomorrow and finishing it. But I just want to say that I don't have any reason not to believe her, because I know that these things have happened at KANAKUK camps. A few things did kind of surprise me, and that I, again, not necessarily wrestling with, but just like, oh, okay. I guess that's what happened then, or that's how it is. So a little bit of backstory. Like I said, I've been to KANAKUK camps twice in my life, both before the ages of 12. And I will just say that nothing inappropriate ever happened with me or a counselor or another adult, another child. There was nothing sexual that ever happened in those experiences. I, from a personal standpoint, have nothing but good things to say about KANAKUK camps. Now, that's not to say that these things didn't happen and they're not evil and they're not wicked and that the camp shouldn't shut down, because at a certain point, and I believe we've gotten to that point, I do believe that the camp is probably in that space where they need to shut down, and the leadership needs to change, and it should go under new ownership, and anything to do with KANAKUK, in my opinion, needs to be erased, and anybody within leadership needs to be putting out job applications, in my opinion. I want to introduce scripture into this because I do believe that that's the most important thing that we can do. I do believe what we're seeing right now as the illumination of what has happened over years and years is exactly what we see in Luke 8, Luke 8:17, for there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known and brought out into the open. And we're seeing that right now with some of these things that have happened. Now, I cannot attest to the validity of every claim that Elizabeth makes in the podcast. I haven't fact-checked everything, but I can tell you my story, and I can tell you what my experience was, and how KANAKUK camps changed my life for the better, but also the tragedy of the fact that somebody else could have had the exact opposite experience of me, and just the demonic nature of that. So a little bit of backstory. I grew up in Branson, Missouri. I went to Branson High School. I spent 1 year or a year and a half outside of Branson in Texas, and that was actually the first time I was in 3rd grade. I came back for the summer and went to KANAKUK camps for a week, both times for a week. And I've got my notes here, so if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. And I had an amazing experience both times. I'm trying to remember which time it was, but she spoke about this in the video, or in the podcast episode, about a crucifixion reenactment. So I actually want to show you guys something. So my Bible that I've had for the last, from the time I was 11 or 12, maybe younger, to the time I'm 28 now, to the time I was 24, 25, was, if you can see this, what does it say? It's kind of hard to say, but KANAKUK. And then you have this cross right here. If you watched the episode, you heard her talk about the crucifixion reenactments. And she talked about it in a negative light. And I could see, well, first of all, I think it's amazing that she is still a person of faith. Because a lot of times when we see these cult things, when we see these sexual abuse scandals, people walk away from the faith and they attribute their faith to that. So I just want to say, good on her. Amazing that the Holy Spirit has continued to work on her heart, and that she's coming out and speaking about these things, not from a place of resentment towards faith, but a place of resentment towards the people that have abused the faith. And so I think that's the big takeaway. One of the big takeaways from this is that she is still a person of faith, and we should be cheering that on. And we should be, as people of faith, we should be cheering this on. But so anyway, like I was saying, the crucifixion reenactment. So she spoke about, the crosses and whatnot. So when I was there, this Bible, it's an ESV, was actually, engraved and carved and everything. And this was actually something that we had on the campus at KANAKUK, was a cross with a pair of shoes. And so I imagine that the cross that this is based on is a cross that Joe White or somebody had actually carved, put together. And these crucifixion reenactments, I remember it very vividly. I remember it very strongly. And I can't remember if it was the first or second time I went. I think it was the first time. And at this point, I was already saved. I was already a Christian, and I had already put my faith in Christ. But at that point, I had never felt the love of Christ more than in that crucifixion reenactment. And this was not Elizabeth's experience, and I'm not saying everybody else is going to have the same experience, but for me, this was the first time that I felt like my sin was on full display, and God's love for me was fully manifest. So we actually went back, and I was bawling my eyes out, crying my eyes out, because I just felt Jesus' love over me so much in that moment and in that camp, and seeing the crucifixion reenactment and seeing, them whipping him and nailing him to a cross. And it wasn't Joe White that was being nailed to the cross, but I actually, for the first time in my life, had felt the love of God in such a manifest way that I had never felt at that time before. And I am very sorry, and my heart pours out for those that did not have the same experience and for those that are hurt. It is hard for me to imagine that God could be doing such a great work in my life in that moment and in those camps. But right down the hall for me, somebody could have been sexually abused and turned away from the faith. That is a tragedy. It's evil. It's wicked. It needs to be cast out and called out. And at the very best, this entire thing on a Joe White and the leadership that is behind KANAKUK camps is a lack of godly leadership. At the very best, if I'm being as generous as I can, and I don't know Joe, I've seen him speak twice, and I've seen him give 2 messages that were life-changing twice. So I think a lot of times when these things happen, we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, this happened, so nothing good could have come out of it. And just like we see in Genesis 50:20, when Joseph is speaking to his brothers, he says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today," or the salvation of many lives. And so we see this theme throughout Scripture where God is still working in the midst of evil and wickedness. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, I'm sorry, where God is working, the devil is trying to creep in. And unfortunately for KANAKUK camps, it seems like it happened to an extent that I believe, and I believe most people, once they listen to the podcast, and if the podcast is true, if everything that Elizabeth is saying is true, or even if most of it is true, the camp should shut down. So as for me and my ties to KANAKUK, I have multiple family members that have served there, that have worked there, great people. One of my cousins actually spent a month there last year. And as far as my knowledge is concerned, nothing bad has ever happened in that context. My 3 Bible study leaders in high school were part of K-Life, which is the branch that she speaks of outside of KANAKUK, which is like their non-summer events that they do. So from 7th grade to high school, I was at K-Life almost every night or every week on school nights. My 3 Bible study leaders were all the directors of K-Life throughout 7th and 8th grade, junior high, 9th and 10th grade, and then 11th and 12th grade. All the directors of K-Life were my Bible study leaders. And I can say that nothing has ever happened. Those were all outstanding gentlemen that loved the Lord, that would never even think to do something like that. And it is unfortunate that there is a stain potentially on their reputation because of these actions. But I can just say for myself, for the people that I was around, these things didn't happen. It is unfortunate. In junior high, I went on a ski trip with K-Life. In junior high, I also went on a mission trip with K-Life. And we went to Texas. I remember that our principal actually went with us, and one of the things that stands out to me, one, is just the relationship I got to build with him as a strong follower. But he actually got mugged on that trip. I believe I was in 7th grade. Is it the 7th or 8th grade? It might have been 7th grade. But we got to go share the gospel with inner city kids, and yeah, he had walked out without a buddy at a place we were staying, and 2 guys jumped him, busted his head open. He had to go to the hospital. He was fortunately fine, and nobody else got hurt. But this is all this to say that this was my childhood, was KANAKUK and then K-Life, mostly in my junior high and high school years. KANAKUK camps is actually where I got introduced to wrestling. So I wrestled all throughout junior high, high school, and then college. I spent 5 years. I spent 2 years at a junior college, and then 3 years I finished up at Oregon State. Now I compete in jiu-jitsu, and I did MMA for a little bit. But KANAKUK had this thing where, you could try out a sport, and that was, you had like a 2-day trial. I think you could do up to 2 sports a day, or maybe 1 sport a day. And it might have been a 3-day trial, and then 3 or 4 days after. And this was the second time I went. I do remember that. And you could try out a sport, and then at the end of it, there was a competition. So you spent 2 or 3 days figuring out what sport you wanted to do, and then you spent the next 3 or 4 days doing that sport. And I remember that we did, I chose wrestling. And instead of going to check out another sport, I did wrestling. And I think this was a year or two before light went out. It is what it is. But I think this was a year or two before I even started wrestling in junior high, because I started wrestling when I was like 11, 12 years old. And so don't mind the light. I think it overheated. I can turn it back on here in a minute. But yeah, so that was actually where I was introduced to wrestling. We had a bunch of celebrities that came through. I know one in particular was Lecrae, the artist, the Christian rapper. And he would come through, and he would do a lot of, he would do some ministry. He would do some, I believe he did some rap. I wasn't ever there when he was there. But yeah, they would do a lot of stuff with him. He would come play basketball. I remember one time my neighbor was telling me that he played basketball with Lecrae. Yeah, just a lot of people had come through that. KANAKUK was a huge thing. A lot of my friends in high school went there and were counselors. I actually considered being a counselor there after college, but then COVID happened, and so I didn't get the opportunity to do that. Give me 1 second. Okay. Sorry. So I didn't get the opportunity to do that. It's just tough. It's tough because this was my childhood, man. This was where I grew up. This is what I did. This was like the reason that I am a Christian now is I think because of the influence that I had. And it's just so sad to think that these things were happening in the same places that I was and potentially at the same time. And that's the hardest thing, to think that like somebody that went there could have completely had a different experience than me. And, what has happened and these allegations. And I mean, even listening to the podcast, I remember so many things. Like I forgot what link year was. And I remember a lot of people that were at my high school ended up doing link year and taking a gap year and going through their ministry program. And just to see this happening is so sad. And it is so frustrating that they didn't find a way to address this earlier and make it right after the one time. I remember there was a story, friend, somebody I knew, older than me, so much older than me, had gotten arrested for a DUI and was in jail. And I'd never believed this story. I always thought that there was some falsehood to it. And listening to this podcast, the lady said something that really stuck out to me that made me think, oh wow, this story, it probably is true. But I remember he was in jail, and he said that while he was in jail, there was 13 KANAKUK counselors in there for sexual abuse. And I just remember thinking that seems like a crude exaggeration. And when I was listening to the podcast, she said that there was 11 that had been convicted and 13 because 2 of them had passed the statute of limitations, but they did it. And I just remember I just wonder if those were the 13 guys that were in jail with my buddy when he got arrested. Yeah, I remember, I'm looking at some of these things. I remember Kids Across America. In the podcast, she talks about how that was, geared towards the black communities. And I remember in high school, we actually did have a black family that ran Kids Across America. And just hearing some of these things, it was so sad. So sad. I'm looking at my notes right now, seeing if there's anything else that I missed. As for Joe White and the family, it's despicable. And like I said, at best, it's bad leadership. It's horrible leadership. The fact that he's running the board should never happen. With things like this, and how many people knew about what was going on, especially after Pete, that was the big one. Yeah, these things should just not happen. It's it says in Luke 17, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were to be cast into the sea, than should cause one of these little ones to stumble or to sin. And, I'm praying for this whole situation. I'm praying more for the victims than I admittedly am for the perpetrators. I think this is utterly disgusting what has happened, what is continuing to happen, and it frustrates me that it continues to happen in the church. And undoubtedly, the world will judge this situation with a different lens than they'll put on the guidance counselors that are gender affirming, or the doctors that do the same thing, or the women that get abortions. And I just, it does suck, because we are the church and we are held to a higher standard. But we need to look at this situation and other situations like it in the same vein. It's a horrible situation. I'm very sad to see what has happened to KANAKUK, because of how much of my life was spent in and around KANAKUK Institute, and how much family ties I have. I mean, even my best friend was trying to get to work there, and then COVID happened and it didn't end up happening. But he was working there, and I remember him telling me some of the line of questioning that they had and the interview process, and it seems like they just didn't do enough. Yeah, I don't know enough. I haven't seen what's going on, but I pray that justice is done. I pray that if it doesn't look good, if hearing what I did here, it doesn't seem like Joe White is innocent, and I've never had anything but a good experience with him, but it seems like he was at least complicit, and that's very sad. I just pray that justice is served. I pray they get the people that have done it, and it's frustrating because I loved KANAKUK so much up to that point. It was the best week of my life, and I could never send my kids there. And that's sad. That's really sad that that's where we've come, and that you can't trust male leadership in the church. Yeah. So I wanted to say, just give a few words from somebody that has been there, and that had a little bit different experience, but my heart goes out to the victims. And, if there is victims out there, please continue to come forward, continue to tell your story. And, yeah, I think all of this goes to show that God is still moving. He's still working. Even if, there's bad things that happen, he's bringing it to light. And I think this is a product of God's providence, that this is coming to light now. I don't understand or necessarily know why these things do happen. But I am grateful that it is coming to light. So I appreciate you guys. I hope this video helps, maybe give you a little bit of insight into just what this place was, my backstory, and give you a different perspective. Not necessarily a different perspective, but I guess a different perspective on, that this for everybody wasn't an evil, disgusting place, and that God is still working in the midst of some of these things. So make sure you like and subscribe. See you guys next time.